He mocked her background, called her just another girl from the ghetto, right into a hot mic. But what retired Judge Drexler didn't know, Jasmine Crockett had been quietly collecting receipts, and the entire country was watching. It started as a routine congressional hearing, but ended with federal agents entering the room, handcuffs in hand. While Drexler smirked and scoffed, Jasmine never flinched, not once. She didn't yell. She didn't raise her voice. She just waited, and then dropped the evidence that brought his 40-year career to a crashing end on live TV. And now, if you believe arrogance and corruption should always be exposed, hit like, leave a comment with where you're watching from, and subscribe for more real-life stories of courage, justice, and accountability. The room was already cold before she stepped in, not from the air conditioning, but from something deeper. It was the kind of chill that clung to power, to entitlement, the kind of cold that let men like Judge William Drexler walk into spaces like this with his head high and a smirk locked in place, knowing the game was already tilted in his favor. The Rayburn House Office building had hosted hundreds of oversight hearings before, but something about this one felt different. Not because of the case, not even because of the cameras, but because today, seated at the end of the panel, was a woman they weren't expecting to fight back this hard and win. Jasmine Crockett walked in without fanfare, no entourage, no blazer embroidered with committee pins, just her, a neat legal pad, and a quiet fire that had followed her since the first day she realized the system wasn't made to protect women like her, it was built to ignore them. She took her seat 2 chairs away from Drexler, eyes forward, her expression unreadable. But the tension in the room changed the second she adjusted her mic. Everyone felt it, even the ones pretending not to look her way. Judge Drexler didn't need to speak to be heard. The sharp click of his cufflinks, the smug way he leafed through his pre-written testimony, the heavy silence he weaponized like a second language. He had mastered the art of undermining without raising his voice. The man had spent 40 years in courtrooms mastering performance under the banner of impartiality, but he wasn't impartial. Not today. Not with her. The hearing was about federal contract fraud, boring on paper, explosive beneath the surface. A major infrastructure contractor had been siphoning off taxpayer money through fake invoices, ghost payrolls, and sweetheart vendor deals. Towns in Arkansas and Missouri had been left with half-paved roads and unusable drainage systems. Millions were missing, and someone in Washington had helped cover it up. On the witness list, the company's CFO. But seated beside Jasmine as an expert advisor was Drexler himself, the same judge who had ruled in favor of the very same contractor in multiple cases during his tenure, the same man with photos at golf fundraisers and emails CC'd on board meeting summaries no judge should have been reading. Jasmine had seen enough paper trails in her time to know when someone was being protected, and today she wasn't here for a soundbite, she was here for blood. Still, she didn't show it. She kept her posture relaxed, her questions methodical. She started with softballs, basic dates, expense line items, vendor lists. The CFO stuttered, sweated, offered legal jargon that sounded impressive but meant nothing. Jasmine smiled once, briefly, when he contradicted himself on page 3 of the quarterly report. Then came the interruption. A scoff, quiet but sharp, picked up by the hot mic in front of Judge Drexler. It wasn't the words, it was the sound. The unmistakable sound of dismissal. Like he couldn't believe she was even speaking. She didn't look at him. Not yet. That would come later. She pressed forward. Mr. Reed, can you explain the January 11th payment for $845,000 to SAF Freight Services when your shipping logs show only $120,000 worth of activity that month? Reed blinked. I'd have to check with procurement. Jasmine nodded. Calm, collected. Then she slid the paper across the table, his signature, clear as day. You signed the approval. That's when Drexler leaned in again. Excuse me, Madam Chair, he said, voice dripping with condescension. Is this a hearing or a witch hunt? The chairwoman, to her credit, didn't bite. Judge Drexler, please allow Congresswoman Crockett to finish. He smiled, thin and smug. By all means. I just thought hearings were meant to seek truth, not make someone from the projects feel important. The insult was surgical, deliberate, personal. Jasmine still didn't flinch. but the room did. A few aides lowered their eyes. One camera operator visibly winced. Jasmine didn't reply. Not yet. She turned another page, found another inconsistency, kept going. Drexler, meanwhile, sat back like he'd already won, his hands clasped over his stomach, his smirk lingering like bad cologne. He wasn't worried about facts. He was here to dominate. That was his game. Let her swing, he thought. Let her tire herself out with paperwork. But Jasmine had grown up in rooms colder than this. She had learned long ago that you don't interrupt a man like Drexler mid-smirk. You let him dig. You let him sweat. You let him think he's already won. And then you flip the entire room on him. So when she finally looked up and met his gaze, steady, unshaken, it wasn't to defend herself. It was to measure the man who thought he could erase her with a smirk and a microphone. "I've had to fight for every room I've walked into," she said, voice low. "And I've stayed in those rooms not because I performed, but because I did the work people like you refused to do." Tharathought. The tension snapped like a rubber band. Drexler leaned forward. "Oh, I know your type, Congresswoman. Always so emotional, always so theatrical. You've got a degree and a headline, and suddenly you think you run the show." She nodded slowly. "The only thing I'm trying to run is a hearing where the truth doesn't get buried under someone's ego." It wasn't the volume of her words that cut him. It was the calm. And as the room settled, as pens stopped scribbling and phones stopped buzzing, everyone watching knew something had shifted, not just in the hearing, but in who had control of it now. The moment Drexler leaned back with that satisfied smirk, something inside Jasmine Crockett clicked into place. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even vindication. It was strategy. Like a chess player seeing the move, 5 plays ahead, and deciding, without fanfare, that checkmate was inevitable. Jasmine let the silence breathe. It wasn't awkward. It was calculated. She turned another page in her legal pad, her fingertips running over the edge, as if weighing the precise second to let the truth unravel. When she looked up again, the camera light caught the faintest glint in her eyes. Steel, not tears. "Chairwoman Gates," she said, voice measured. "Before I continue with Mr. Reed, I'd like to enter several documents into the record." The chairwoman nodded. "Proceed." Jasmine slid a thick folder toward the committee clerk. "This contains internal memos, payment receipts, and contractor correspondence linked directly to Judge Drexler's advisory role at McKenna Infrastructure Group. I'd like to draw attention specifically to pages 7, 14, and 22. Drexler shifted. Page 7, an email chain, dated September 19, 2019, between Drexler and McKenna executives discussing mitigating risk exposure by guiding litigation outcomes. Page 14, a copy of a check, signed and deposited, made out to Drexler from a Shell LLC registered 3 weeks after McKenna lost a preliminary injunction on a fraud case. Page 22, a document listing project advisory payments, with Drexler's initials beside 3 ghost contractor authorizations. The smirk didn't vanish. It cracked, just a little. A twitch in his upper lip, a stiffness in his jaw. Jasmine didn't look at him. She stayed focused on the documents. "Mr. Reed," she continued, her voice as calm as it had been all morning. "Can you confirm that the signature on page 14 is yours?" Reed leaned in. His lawyer whispered. Reed nodded slowly. "Yes. That's mine." "And can you explain why this check was issued to Judge Drexler 3 days before his court opinion on McKenna versus District Planning Board, which ruled in your favor and dismissed fraud allegations with prejudice?" Reed looked at the lawyer again. We were advised that was an honorary advisory fee, standard." Jasmine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Standard for who?" "Objection," Drexler barked suddenly, his voice sharp. Chairwoman Gates raised a hand. "You are not recognized. This committee is questioning the witness." Jasmine turned another page. "Mr. Reed, did Judge Drexler provide legal guidance during any internal discussions about pending cases related to McKenna?" Reed hesitated. "Not officially." "Sato, but unofficially?" I can't say." "You can't say or you won't?" Reed faltered. Jasmine let it hang. Behind her, aides scrambled to reprint copies. Phones buzzed. One reporter in the back slowly lifted their camera for a better angle. Everyone knew what was happening. The courtroom titan was cracking. Drexler interjected again. "This is a political ambush." Jasmine finally looked at him, not with rage, but with something colder. A calm judgment. "I don't need politics, Judge. I have facts. You can throw smoke, but this time the fire's already reached the door." He stood. "This is character assassination." Chairwoman Gates's gavel snapped against the desk. "Judge Drexler, you are out of order. If you continue to interrupt, I will have you removed." But Drexler wasn't listening anymore. His voice was rising. "She's lying. She's trying to ruin me." "Then answer her questions," Chairwoman Gates replied, "but do it like everyone else, under oath." The silence that followed was brutal. Drexler didn't respond. He didn't sit. He just stood there, stuck between outrage and fear. The man who had smirked 15 minutes earlier was now a statue, blinking in disbelief. Jasmine returned to her notes. "Mr. Reed, did Judge Drexler instruct your legal department to withhold documents from a subpoena filed by the Office of the Inspector General in 2021? The answer was slower this time. "Yes." "And did your company comply with that instruction?" Yes." Jasmine closed her folder. "Let the record reflect that a sitting federal contractor acknowledged deliberate obstruction of an official investigation, advised by a former judge currently testifying in this very hearing." Chairwoman Gates leaned into her mic. "So noted." The room didn't applaud. No one cheered. But the energy was thunderous, because in that moment, everyone watching, on Capitol Hill, on C-SPAN, at kitchen tables across America, realized that the gavel had passed, not by title, but by truth. And Jasmine Crockett held it now. The moment Jasmine closed her folder, the room froze, not in tension, but in realization. A realization that this wasn't just another hearing. This wasn't the usual political theater. This was accountability live. And for once, it wasn't landing on the underdog. It was boomeranging back to the man who had spent decades hiding behind his black robe. Drexler sat rigid, his face losing that practiced veneer of arrogance. But he still had one card left to play, or so he thought. With the precision of a man who believed his words could still shield him, Drexler tapped his mic again and leaned forward. "I refuse to answer any more questions on the basis that this committee is engaging in character defamation and weaponized hearsay," he said, his voice tight. "I will not allow myself to be the subject of a public lynching for the sake of optics." You could hear the gasp ripple across the room. The word landed with a cold, dull thud. Jasmine didn't blink. Chairwoman Gates leaned in, her jaw taut. "Judge Drexler, that language is both inappropriate and offensive. If you continue down this path, I will ask security to remove you." Drexler doubled down. "You can't silence the truth. This is a hit job. She's grandstanding because she knows this won't hold up in court." And that's when it happened. The door at the back of the hearing chamber creaked open, and two plainclothes federal agents entered quietly. They didn't say a word, didn't flash badges. They just stood by the wall, hands folded, eyes locked on Drexler. Everyone turned. Except Jasmine. She stayed still, pen between her fingers, eyes on her legal pad like this was just another Tuesday. Chairwoman Gates cleared her throat. For the record, this committee has received notification from the Department of Justice that Judge Drexler has been named in a sealed indictment, and federal authorities are present to execute that warrant pending the conclusion of this session. A reporter's pen hit the floor. Drexler's face paled, his hands twitched. "This is absurd," he muttered. "I served this country for 40 years. I built my reputation on fairness. You people—" One of the agents stepped forward. "Judge Drexler, please stand." Drexler stood, but not like a man defending his honor, more like someone watching their foundation crack beneath their feet. He looked toward Jasmine for a lifeline. She offered him none. "Congresswoman," he rasped, "this isn't you. Don't do this. Don't let them—" Jasmine met his eyes. "I didn't do this. You did." As the cuffs clicked, no one cheered, no one clapped. The weight of the moment didn't leave room for noise, just understanding. Just history turning in real time. Drexler was led out the side door. Cameras followed. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks, muted behind thick oak walls. And when it was over, Jasmine quietly reopened her folder and said, "Madam Chair, I'm ready to proceed." That single sentence did more than restart the hearing. It reset the room. Not as a space where men like Drexler could mock, interrupt, and control, but as a chamber where truth would be spoken plainly, fully, and, most of all, unapologetically. The rest of the hearing passed in a blur. Witnesses answered questions with new caution. Reed's legal counsel requested a recess, and staffers from both sides of the aisle suddenly found themselves scribbling notes for follow-up investigations. But Jasmine, she was already looking beyond the moment, beyond the headlines, beyond the trending tags. She was thinking of the other Drexlers still out there, and she was ready for them too. By sunrise the next day, the hearing room was empty, but the country was on fire. It wasn't just the usual Washington shuffle of headlines and hot takes. Something deeper had settled into the national bloodstream, a collective feeling that something had finally gone right. Clips of Drexler's arrest flooded every platform. Cable news anchors couldn't stop looping the moment Jasmine looked him dead in the eye and said, "I didn't do this. You did." Twitter boiled over. TikTok users paired the footage with gospel choirs and slow-motion captions. Hashtags like "Justice Served," "Justice Jasmine for the People," and "Justice Ghetto Girl Wins" trended for 48 hours straight. But in between the internet frenzy, something more honest stirred. People, especially older Americans, sat a little straighter at their kitchen tables. They leaned back in their recliners and said things they hadn't said in years. She reminded me of Barbara Jordan. She reminded me of the girl I voted for in '72, the one they said was too young, too black, too bold. She didn't raise her voice once, and still the whole room listened. In a small town in South Carolina, a retired postal worker sent a handwritten letter to Jasmine's office. It read, "I never believed anyone would hold men like him accountable. I'm 78 years old, but when you spoke, I felt 20 again. Please keep going. See you." Meanwhile, in a community church in Tulsa, a pastor replayed the clip on loop during a Sunday sermon. "See," he told his congregation, "dignity doesn't need to shout. It needs to stand firm." But it wasn't just supporters, it was skeptics too. Men and women who had quietly questioned whether she was ready for this spotlight. Pundits who had labeled her combative, too sharp, or unpolished. They didn't walk back their words, not all of them. But their silence now said more than their old columns ever had. Congressional staffers received over 3,000 emails in a single day. Many were from veterans, many from women, and many from seniors who had spent a lifetime watching courtroom bullies and political egos dodge responsibility. They saw Drexler as a symbol of what had gone wrong with American power, and Jasmine as a rare flash of what could still go right. And while the world talked, Jasmine stayed silent. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't tweet. She went back to work. Because she knew the difference between a moment and a movement. And she wasn't chasing applause. She was chasing change. In the days that followed, Drexler's lawyers issued a statement claiming he was blindsided, politically targeted, and unfairly portrayed. But no one believed it. Not after the documents, not after the receipts. Even those who had defended him privately started cleaning up their connections, scrubbing old endorsements, and quietly rewriting their talking points. And the younger generation, they noticed everything. In a Chicago high school, a group of teenage girls printed Jasmine's photo and taped it to the wall with the caption, "Unbothered, unshaken, unapologetic." In a Houston community center, elders gathered for lunch and watched the full hearing replay like it was a championship game. One man stood up afterward and said, "We prayed for people like her. Now we need to protect her." Jasmine's name was everywhere, but she didn't chase it. Instead, she met with community leaders, listened to survivors of other fraud cases, quietly proposed legislation to tighten advisory board oversight for federal contractors. She showed up to every committee meeting prepared, notes straight, voice steady, focus locked. Chairwoman Gates, now a quiet ally, leaned over one day and whispered, "You changed something, you know." Jasmine just nodded. It's not finished yet. And it wasn't, because the ripple was growing. People were watching more hearings now, asking more questions, following the paper trails. They weren't waiting for someone to save them. They were organizing, showing up, and remembering what it looked like when a woman walked into a room built to break her, and stood her ground instead. This was no longer just about Drexler. This was about the America he thought he could hide in, and the America Jasmine was trying to rebuild. Months passed. Drexler's indictment turned into arraignment. His defense was loud, but his supporters quieter by the week. Each new headline brought more documentation, more connections, more buried truths. Meanwhile, Jasmine continued to show up, each hearing, each vote, each hallway interaction, with the same discipline and grace that had disarmed a courtroom and dethroned a judge. But legacy doesn't live in the headlines. It lives in the ripples. In a living room in Alabama, an 84-year-old grandmother sat beside her granddaughter and said, "That's how we used to fight, not with fists, with presence." In a diner in Kansas, a retired veteran slammed his coffee down and muttered, "I served 22 years. That woman's got more honor than half the medals I've seen." Even in the Capitol itself, Jasmine's name started to carry weight, not flashy, not feared, but respected. Her office filled with letters. Her staffers noted the change. Fewer lobbyists knocking, more citizens writing, not for favors, for hope. One letter came from a girl named Ayanna in Detroit, 14 years old. "I want to be a lawyer," she wrote, "but sometimes I think I'm not loud enough. Then I saw you. You didn't yell. You just stood there, and the whole world listened." That's what legacy is. The echo of a moment that keeps teaching, keeps grounding, keeps guiding. Jasmine never changed her rhythm, never let the chaos pull her out of her calm, because the job wasn't over when Drexler was cuffed. It was only beginning. She fought not just for the truth, but for the space where others could tell theirs. When the final hearing of the fiscal quarter convened, Jasmine walked in the same way she always had, shoulders back, notes in hand, no headlines, no press. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there to do the work. A staffer whispered, "They're watching you now, you know." Jasmine smiled. "Good, let them learn." Because it's not the performance that changes things, it's the consistency, the resilience, the refusal to shrink. Judge Drexler's name faded from the news cycles, replaced by newer scandals, newer distractions. But Jasmine's moment stayed, in classrooms, in church basements, in quiet kitchen tables where people still talk about right and wrong like it matters. One night, alone in her office, Jasmine flipped through the old case notes, not to relive it, but to remember. To remember that in a country tired of shouting, sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stay calm, stay ready, and stay standing. She reached for her pen and added 3 words to the margin of her notebook. Still here, still rising. Because the truth? That's what justice looks like, not a roar, but a woman who never sat down. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of showing up, even when the system is against you, please hit like, share it, and subscribe for more real-life stories about courage, truth, and the kind of leadership that stands its ground when it matters most.